this is the first UNGAS that's happened in almost 2 decades, and it's a vastly different world than the one that happened in '98, where the slogan was "a drug-free world, we can do it," and you really found countries rallying behind that. And you had President Clinton addressing the General Assembly with his, position of tough on crime laws, and where dissent was just not really, it wasn't really acknowledged, and it wasn't really a factor of it. Now, 2016 is a different world. The idea of a drug-free world is still pushed by some countries, but it's no longer widely accepted throughout the UN system. And you do have this break where there are more countries that have done something nationally and are willing to speak out about it. So I think it is a different time, and I think it can make us hopeful. There are also more NGO actors, and I think this UNGAS will at least pave the way for future gatherings, for 2019, for the next UNGASs. It really, I think, will be looked at as the time where the consensus was broken.
I think it's fair to say that the process so far in the negotiations for some sort of outcome document from the UNGAS have been less than satisfactory. In fact, they've been quite flawed. The fact that they've been kept in the Vienna bubble, where only a minority of member states really have any ability to effectively engage in the negotiations, is a real problem. This is a global challenge, and all countries are affected by this. So we are, troubled by, but not surprised by, reports that the Russian Federation, for example, has been actively engaged in trying to block any sort of reasonable language about harm reduction, about human rights, and so on. Given the way in which Russia is playing politics with the drug issue domestically for domestic political power purposes, it's not surprising. But it's disappointing.
So what we've seen is a process of negotiating a document behind closed doors with, frankly, bullying by some of the bigger countries, and where a lot of countries don't have a say. So from my point of view, the document lacks legitimacy and credibility, whatever the outcome is, because the process has been so non-transparent, not open, and not democratic.
One of the sad things that is happening at the UN is that all of these conversations around drug policy and the UNGAS are not being reflective of what's happening in the world on a country level, on a city level, on local levels. We're at a really interesting time with drug policy, where over the last few years, the rate of change has accelerated, and you have now an incredible network of NGOs, of governments, of academics, of great spokespeople who are talking about the need for new policies. And having worked in this, it feels like a really exciting time when you look at those kind of changes. But we're not seeing that reflected anywhere at the UN level. And you have your group of friendly countries that are trying to bring kind of that on the ground reality to the UN, but it just gets lost in a lot of process related issues. The status quo eventually prevails because of the consensus nature of the UN negotiations. The countries that are advocating for the status quo policies are able to say no to a lot of the changes. We still have a long way to go when you look at the actual numbers, and it's those countries that are wedded to the repressive approach that sometimes feel like they're dominating the conversation.
Those countries who are ready and prepared to be guided by the evidence, by a concern for public health, and by a concern for human rights should find the resolve, at long last, to move ahead with different approaches. A number of countries have done that, but they remain a minority, an important minority, who've shown that in fact it is possible to take a different approach with very good outcomes, that you don't need to hew blindly to the orthodoxy of the drug control regime and its very strict, narrow, prohibitionist interpretations, that you can in fact jettison the war on drugs and take a different approach, and you actually get better outcomes in terms of saving money, better protection for public health, better respect for human rights. More and more countries, I think, need to find the courage to do that and show that, in fact, the old way and the old system is damaging and broken, and we're not going to be bound by it anymore.
Regardless of the outcome document, I think that the UNGAS has achieved some very important things. One, Civil society has been much more engaged and present than has been the case in the past, and we have been able to interact directly with governments that share some of our concerns, and have participated in a civil society task force. We have produced amazing material, and I think that that in and of itself has really helped bring civil society together around the world, and that work will continue after the UNGAS. And the other very important points are that the UNGAS has also served as a way to bring in other UN agencies. Drug policy is the only issue within the UN system that is managed solely by basically two agencies that deal with drug policy, the Commission on Narcotic Drugs and the International Narcotics Control Board. And no other agencies, not even health-related UN agencies, are part of that discussion. And because of the UNGAS, we have seen much more engagement on the part of the WHO, the World Health Organization, the UN Development Program, UNDP, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and our challenge is going to be to keep them engaged after April of this year. And finally, the very fact that we're having this debate is really significant. I mean, I've been working on drug policy for a very long time now. This debate was taboo, even when I started coming to the United Nations about 10 years ago for these meetings, and certainly in other parts of the world, such as Latin America, until only recently. You didn't question the policy. We now have a block of countries that are saying these policies aren't working. And in fact, they may be doing more harm than good, and we need to think about alternative approaches. My feeling is that post-UNGAS, after April, the debate goes back to the countries, and that's where I think we're going to start seeing some real interesting reforms, in addition to those already taking place, starting on the ground. And ultimately, change is going to come from the ground up, not from the UN down.